All right, guys. Well, thank you so much for coming back to the channel. Today, I'm really excited about my guest. Morley Robbins is here with me. And I want to do a little side note before we even jump into anything. If you guys have questions about the things that we discussed today, we are very happy and excited to record more of these for you. So as Morley has said, some of these things that we'll be talking about will spur more and more questions. So don't be afraid to comment underneath the video if you have questions, and we will record more videos like this for you guys. So without further ado, without more of my talking, Morley, welcome to the show, and thank you so much for being here today.
Sarah, delighted to be here and looking forward to our conversation.
Yeah, well, you know, we were talking a little bit before I turned the camera on, and Sarah and Ashley, the Armstrong sisters, are friends of mine. So I've been kind of watching all of their videos that you did with them. And the one thing that I wanted to talk about first, because there's so much we can talk about, is just this issue of histamines, you know. And for me personally, going carnivore, and now I'm kind of a ketogenic carnivore diet, I didn't realize how bad my histamine issues were until I started eating this way. And I see people, same thing with keto, eating very high fat or eating carnivore, starting to uncover and kind of see all these histamine issues. So why do you think that that is?
Well, real simple, because we're all minerally deranged. No, we're, I'm like the fourth generation of my family. You're probably the fifth in your family. There's just this general erosion of minerals in our food and therefore in our tissue, and people aren't aware of that. They don't know that it's minerals that run the show. And because we've spent most of our lives going to see doctors who have a degree which stands for mineral denialist, and they don't know how the body really works. They're long on pharmacology, but they're very short on physiology. So that's a big gap between physiology and pharmacology. So I think it's important to stress a couple things. One, our bodies are really smart, incredibly intelligent. So we're going to be engaged in a series of conversations. We're exchanging bits of information at about 2,000 bits per second, which is pretty fast.
Yeah.
But the part of our brain that runs our body is called the hypothalamus. And it's the size of an almond. It has 64 chambers inside it. And that's where electrical energy becomes chemical energy. That's where all the master regulatory hormones flow out of the hypothalamus. So everybody's all freaked out about their rising TSH, thyroxine stimulating hormone, right? But nobody knows about TRH, which is above it, which regulates it, thyroid regulating hormone, and it's copper dependent. So when TRH is gasping for copper, it sends a signal to the thyroid, or to the pituitary, to make more TSH. And then TSH starts to scream, we need thyroid hormone. And that's why the TSH rises, because TRH is coughing, choking, because it doesn't have the minerals that it needs to do its job. So trust me, we could spend several hours just talking about that one dynamic. And I've actually done that with Anna Spar, who's a very noted health coach in Sweden. You might look up her.
Oh yeah, okay.
Really, really fun series of conversations that she and I had. In any event, the body's really smart, has this hypothalamus, and it thinks 2 million times faster than you and I can talk. And so what do most people do? They read an article on the internet, or they talk to someone that they trust, and that person tells them to do a detox. And they don't know that the body knows how to detox if it has the minerals. The liver is incredibly powerful. It's got at least 500 enzymes. But guess what? They all require minerals, especially copper. The liver is billed as an iron organ, but it's really a storage center for copper and retinol. That's its primary storage depot in the body for these critically important nutrients. But most people don't know that.
Yeah.
And so the detox requires energy. And then most people don't have enough energy to get through the day, much less do a detox. So there's a lot of confusion about what to do when you don't feel right.
Yes.
You know? And so a lot of people are turning to these diets, like the carnivore and the keto diet, or a blended. And I think it's, to me, the nutritional foundation for everyone, before they do any kind of decisions about this diet or that diet, they really should read Weston A. Price and his research. Physical and nutrient deterioration, or what degeneration, I think it is.
Yes.
In any event, it's based on a decade of research that he and his wife did traveling around the world. And he was a dentist, and he was looking for perfect teeth. Now you say, okay, so he's kind of a weird dentist looking for perfect teeth, but there was actually a very specific reason why he was on a quest to find perfect teeth. And he and his wife identified 14 indigenous communities: Inuit Indians in Alaska, Maasai tribesmen in Africa, Swiss goat herders, all over the planet. And the diets were different, but also very consistent. And the reason he got obsessed with this, he was a dentist. He was a very gifted dentist out of Cleveland. And he did a root canal on his 10-year-old son. Guess what happened?
He died.
He died.
Yeah.
Most people don't know that.
Yeah.
And so I think the research was a mourning process to try to turn lemons into lemonade. He was so shattered by this experience, he didn't want anyone else to ever have this experience again. And so he went into it, though, with a bias. He said people who have perfect teeth are going to be vegetarian, maybe vegan, and they're going to have a low-fat diet. And guess what he discovered?
The opposite.
The opposite, exactly.
Goodness.
It's amazing. And again, if we didn't have the research from Weston A. Price, we would be screwed.
Yeah.
Absolutely screwed. Pardon the French, but people don't realize how important that research is, because it's the bedrock of human nutrition and how the body really works. And he was shocked to find out that everyone around the planet had animal protein. It's either whale blubber or ants or whatever it was, but they all had animal protein. And the amount of fat in the diet, in terms of percent calories, it could have been upwards of 60 to 65% of the diet. That's an enormous bolus of fat to have to process. Now, what your listeners may or may not know is that in order to break down fat, you got to have bioavailable copper in your metabolism. And so when we say metabolism, what the heck does that mean? It means the body's got the mitochondria need to be able to break down the food so it can make energy.
Yes.
That's really what it comes down to. And we have 100 trillion cells on average in our body. That's big number. That's 12 zeros, right? And there's 40 quadrillion mitochondria. So we all have this, and we can all remember our high school chemistry or biology textbook that had a picture of the cell, and there was 1 or 2 mitochondria, right?
Yeah.
No. The average cell has 400. The liver cell, 2,000 mitochondria. Wow. The kidney cell, 4,000 mitochondria. Heart cell, the organ that never gets a rest, 10,000 mitochondria per cell. Then my favorite is the mature eggs in a woman, 600,000 mitochondria. Wow. That's an incredible level of activity to support new life. Okay? And for the listeners, the average sperm cell has like 50 mitochondria.
Wow.
but there are a lot of them, right? So that's the trade-off.
Yeah.
But then we come to, there's a brain region that people may be familiar with Parkinson's, called the substantia nigra, and the neurons in the substantia nigra have 2 million mitochondria.
Wow.
So we have a very funky understanding about how the body distributes activity and energy, and really what our metabolism is set up to do is to create energy and clear exhaust.
Mm.
And we have incredible enzymes that make energy, and we have incredible enzymes that clear exhaust. And guess what they all run on? Copper top back. Exactly. Can't do it without copper.
Yeah.
You know, and what I'm discovering about the mitochondria, so that, you know, you got the funky little shape, and then there's like this really weird shaped swimming pool inside. What's called the matrix, but like the movie, but the real clinical or scientific name for it is copper matrix pool.
Mm.
It's supposed to be a little swimming pool inside the mitochondria. Turns out these little mitochondria were purple bacteria back in the day. And we go back a couple billion years ago. Some little organism said, I think I'm going to encircle this bacteria and put it to work. So it's an incredible event that took place a long time ago. And as soon as you get to something that's purple, there's an oh my gosh component to it, because it means it's got incredible powers. And the body relies on these purple bacteria to make energy and to clear exhaust. So this is lost on conventional medicine. They don't know any of this stuff. They don't know about the great oxygen event that changed life on this planet.
Mm.
And they don't know that the reason why we're here, the reason why we're having this conversation, the reason why we have these devices is because of our higher intellect that's only made possible by enabling this organ up here to make more energy. So the brain, 2% body weight, consumes 20% of the oxygen.
Mm.
It's incredible. And so if that isn't managed right, it's not gonna work. And the reason why we're able to get past the great oxygen event, which wiped out 99% of life as it was known back in like 2.4 billion years ago, was because of copper. Copper, key enzymes called multi-copper oxidases, which means they turn oxygen into water. They're amazing. There are about 1,000 different forms of those in our gut, supposedly. And a little thing called cholesterol, you've heard of it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so we got copper, these oxidase enzymes, cholesterol, and oh yeah, this thing called melatonin.
Yeah.
And this is billions of years ago.
Mm.
Can't make melatonin without copper.
No.
And so, and it's this powerhouse antioxidant that resides in the mitochondria. Everybody thinks it's in the pineal gland. Well, yeah, there is some in the pineal gland, but it's all over the body. We've been so dumbed down about how the body really works. So back to the storyline of the keto and the carnivore diet is that needs to be broken down by key enzymes called beta oxidation enzymes. And they run on the energy of copper.
Mm.
And this is taking place inside the matrix of the mitochondria. So you've got two wheels that are taking place simultaneously. You've got what's called the tricyclic acid cycle, or the carboxylic acid cycle, the Krebs cycle. Most people probably know it as the Krebs cycle.
Yeah.
And then right next to it is the beta oxidation. And it's breaking down these big chains of fats into smaller and smaller parts so that it can feed the what are called the reductants, sources of reducing agents for the electron transport chain. So if NADH and FADH2 doesn't get produced, well, the electron transport chain can't make the high yield ATP. So when people go from a SAD diet, standard American diet, to a keto diet, there's going to be a shock to the system because it's really nutrient dense, needs to be broken down, and the enzymes can't work right if they don't have access to copper. And so then in a lot of people's body, there's a very good chance they have too much iron in their tissue. It doesn't show up in their blood, but it's in their tissue. And if they can't metabolize that fat, and it mixes with the iron, boom, you have what's called lipid peroxidation. You have the start of a chain reaction. And as soon as that happens, histamines are going to have an uptick.
Okay.
Histamines are this ancient mechanism to try to get rid of toxins. And so when histamines show up, and histamines are the real hormone of alert. They're the true stress hormone. Cortisol is a joke compared to histamine.
Yeah.
And so histamines come in and they get rid of the magnesium and potassium in the cell. And they bring in all this calcium and sodium and water because it's going to cause a 50% drop in energy production like that.
Wow.
And so, when you're having an allergic reaction, what happens? You just feel tired, exhausted. Well, it's because the electrolyte dynamics have just been reversed. And that's the power of histamine. And the thing is, iron as an element does not trigger a histamine reaction. But iron triggers a series of what are called histamine promoters, like hydrogen peroxide. And that as soon as iron starts mixing with fat, you're going to start to have lipid peroxidation. Well, what is that? It's LOOH. Well, it doesn't take long to turn OOH into H2O2, and then you've got this rising pool of hydrogen peroxide that's going to create all sorts of discomfort for the body and the metabolism. So that's the fat side. Now the carnivore side, again, before we turned on the record button, what did you tell me that you did in order to deal with this? You made a very specific change in your diet.
Yeah, I added in kidney, thymus, and liver on a regular basis, and I dropped out the large amounts of muscle meats, and I added in a large portion of fat. So the majority of my diet, I would say 85% upwards, is fat, and then about 15% to 10% is the protein portion. So yeah, it's controversial. A lot of people get mad when you say that, organ meats are helping you feel better. But it is what it is,
No, it is. And what most people don't realize, again, back to the mitochondria in the cells, I don't know what the number of mitochondria in the thymus is, but it's going to be big.
Yeah.
The thymus is basically a copper organ. The T cells, that's what the T stands for, is thymus. The T cells, they don't work without copper because they got to make energy. I mean, our entire immune system, whether we're talking about the innate or the acquired, runs on the energy of copper because it's running on the energy of mitochondria. And it's like that's something that they forgot to tell us over the last 8 months of our existence. And the thymus, very rich in copper. The kidney, are you kidding me? The liver, I mean, in an average, if the animals are eating their native diet, and ruminants like cattle are supposed to be eating grass. What's so important about grass? It's got vitamin C in it. Oh, that's a really important thing to know. And what's at the center of the vitamin C molecule? It's got tyrosinase enzyme. Tyrosinase enzyme is stupid important, and it's got 4 copper atoms inside it. And so, again, the vitamin C molecule, the complex, is incredibly robust. And what's the covering on that? It's called ascorbic acid. Well,
Mm.
ascorbic acid is not the complex, because the complex has this engine called tyrosinase, and inside the engine are these 4 pistons called copper running it. And so that's why it's so important to eat grass-fed
Yeah,
animal
that was
parts.
the next thing I was going to ask you is there's another debate in the carnivore community that it just eat meat, and there's no scientific evidence behind why you'd want to source from a farm like Polyface farms or White Oak pastures, versus just your typical grocery store meat. Now, I've taken a lot of flack because I say, you know what, I'd rather sew up holes in my pants and sew our clothes, be
Right.
thrifty so that I can afford these meats for
Good
my
for you.
family. And that's my personal choice because, you know, let's talk about that a little bit, just a little side note. Why would someone want to do that? Why is that important?
It's incredibly important. And first, real quick, I did a pilgrimage to Polyface Farms. It's an amazing place that if for your followers who've not been there, you'll be blown away by it. It's not this storybook picture of this beautiful farm. It's like one of the most productive 140 acres on the planet. And Joel Charlton is an absolute hoot. But it's really important, again, we need to honor the wisdom of our ancestors. And it's very tempting to say, oh, those old fuddy-duddies, what did they know? Well, those fuddy-duddies knew a lot, and they were very vibrant. And we have pictures of them, and they look old, so what do they know? Well, look at us now. We look old and we're young, right? And people aren't thinking through the significance of the ancestral diet. Again, the bedrock is Dr. Price. You've really got to read that and understand what he was talking about to really have I think, an engaging and responsible debate about what you should be eating today. Because back in the 20s, the reason why he was on such a pell-mell race to get this information, because he knew the diet was changing worldwide. The Western diet was
Yeah.
taking over the world, and it was having a significant impact. And he wanted to make sure that there was at least some kind of scientific record about it. So kudos to him for that. And I think it's important for people to know there's a difference between the mineral content of muscle meat, which is mostly iron. The heme makes it red. Well, what's in the heme? It's iron. And the organ meats they're doing a lot of. I mean, it's not that muscles don't exert energy or make energy, because they do, but the organs are incredibly dependent upon the mitochondria to run the metabolic pathways that they're responsible for. And so they're on constant alert. The heart and the kidney never really get a rest. The heart is an obvious one, but the kidney's always filtering all day and all night long. The liver has waves of activity, but it needs big blocks of time in between. So it's important to understand that there is a difference in the mineral composition, and there's a difference in the energy expenditure of these organs. And at the heart of it is going to be mitochondria. And at the heart of the mitochondria is going to be the electron transport chain. And then you find out, oh, wow, well, the electron transport chain has 5 parts to it. It's got many parts, but let me just try to simplify it. So there's 5 parts, and people know about the first 4, complex 1 through 4. And everyone will agree that complex 4 has copper in it. Well, guess what? Complex 5, I have 5 different citations now that demonstrate that complex 5 does not work without copper. Then I found a citation for complex 1 that it's the second most, the proteins, let's see if I can word this right. The highest concentration of copper at a metabolic level is cytochrome C oxidase enzyme in the mitochondria. The second highest concentration of copper is complex 1. And Sarah, I have been looking for years for that citation, but it changes everything. Because what is complex 1? Where a lot of exhaust gets given off if things aren't right. And if you don't have the right amount of copper there, you're going to start throwing off a lot of superoxide. And what is that? That's an oxygen molecule that's taken on an extra electron. And they call it superoxide when in fact it should be called hyperoxide. It's very reactive. Well, the other place there's a lot of superoxide is complex 3. And I've been studying this one for a long time too. And I just discovered the other day that the plant form of complex 3 is copper dependent. But there's nothing in the literature that says that the animal form is. You think Mother Nature is going to make it completely different? That the plant relies on copper, but we don't. So I put a question mark next to complex 3. So we have 1, question mark 3, 4, and 5 all depend on copper in order to manage the flow of oxygen down that electron transport chain so it can become magnesium ATP at the end. And again, the body doesn't recognize ATP and can't work with ATP if it's not holding on to a magnesium molecule or atom, excuse me. So the whole issue about making energy is incredibly important. And these organ meats are just rich repositories of that mineral. And again, if you want to get really fussy about it, we can talk about the fact that there's over the period of time from 1930 to 2000, there's been an 80% loss of copper on the farm.
Yeah, I think that's a very important point.
Yeah. It's a really unsettling point.
Yeah.
And one of the graduates of my program, he's a small grain farmer in Northern California, and he grows barley and radishes, and they are award-winning barley and radishes. He has the highest Brix content, and Brix is just a measurement of sugars in the produce. And he does one thing at the start of the growing season. He sprays the soil with copper sulfate before he plants the seeds. Now, why would he do that? Because the microbes in the soil need that copper to fix the nitrogen to get it into the plant. So everybody knows NPK, nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium. Well, that's poison to the soil. But if you've got organic soil, you got to feed copper. And it's so important. And he says it's really simple. He said, my fellow farmers think it's too expensive to do it. He said, but I can't not do it because I want to give people a really good product. And he makes this incredible horseradish sauce. And most people don't know what's the kick in horseradish sauce. It's an enzyme called horseradish peroxidase. Runs on the energy of copper. So it's just, it's all cyclical. And what's fascinating, I've been trying to boil these concepts down. And so our ancestors grew up on farms, and we grow up dependent on factories because we buy things from factories.
Yes.
But we buy things from farms too. Yes. But the philosophy of a farm is to reuse and recycle. The philosophy of a factory is to replace it. Very different philosophy. And so our ancestors, what did they recycle on the farm? Well, sun, soil, very important. The excrement, there's an S word that I won't use, and the seeds.
Yeah.
Our ancestors used to be able to put the seeds back into the soil that they got from their food. That's not allowed anymore because of Roundup. Yeah. And so the whole driving force of a farm is to recycle. The whole driving force of Big Pharma is to replace. Oh, you've got a deficiency, you've got to replace that. When in fact, when you study the human body and the metabolism of the human body, it's constantly recycling. One of the most important parts of the body is to recycle iron to make red blood cells.
Right.
It turns out, I just read this morning. This is a great statistic. During the course of an average lifetime, I think it's around 75 years now, our stem cells in our bone marrow, there are only a few thousand of them, and they produce 7 tons of red blood cells.
Wow.
7 tons of red blood cells. So that's about a ton per decade from a few thousand cells that are constantly reinventing red blood cells. Now, here's the wicked part of the human anatomy. This is absolutely amazing. Again, we have to dispel this idea that the meme today is that we are all anemic and copper toxic. That's not true. That's exactly the opposite of what the truth is. The truth of the matter is people have very low levels of bioavailable copper, which prevent functional iron showing up in the blood. And what's happening is the iron is stuck in the tissue, and the blood test does not measure tissue levels of iron. Now, needle biopsies do, Tesla 2 MRIs and above will show up the iron, but those are either very painful or very expensive procedures that most people don't know about, and so they don't know their true iron status. And if the recycling program doesn't have access to copper, then the iron can't get back out of the recycling cells and get back to the bone marrow to make the next day's batch of red blood cells. Because every day, the body has to make like 250 billion red blood cells.
Wow.
And the numbers are really, they're huge. They're ridiculously large. And so that requires a lot of recycling, but here's the catch. We've been trained to believe that we need lots and lots of iron in our diet, get it through our mouth, right? And nobody talks about copper. Now, here's the truth of the matter. Turns out that once we're 18, we don't need copper, we don't need iron in our diet because we're recycling it for the rest of our lives. Recycling all that iron. And of course, there is blood loss, and so there needs to be some ongoing support. But think about it. Women have estrogen more so than they have testosterone.
Yes.
Especially versus a man. And so Ray Peat is the one who figured this out, or at least he talks about it. I don't know whether he figured it out, but somebody did. But if you and I were to sit down and have the same meal, you would absorb 3 times more iron than I would.
Really?
Yes. And if you were pregnant, you would absorb 9 times more iron than I would. And so the body's really smart. It's got this hypothalamus thing that's keeping track of everything. And so we're not supposed to be flooding the body with iron. People do it all the time. And the way the copper metabolism is set up is it discharges it every 24 hours. So we need to replace it in our diet. We got to have access to bioavailable forms of copper. And that's why bee pollen, real vitamin C, organ meats like liver and kidney and thymus are so important because you've got to replace that copper in order to fill up those 40 quadrillion copper matrix pools that nobody knows about. And so it's like, oh my gosh, everything's backwards.
Yeah.
Everything's backwards. And so people are making these dietary decisions, which I absolutely respect the need to feel better, but they don't have full disclosure about how the body really works, or why am I having this reaction to an uptick of fat or an uptick of meat. And I think the issue with the histamine response, which is so important for people, is that there's an enzyme that breaks down histamines. It's called histaminase. It's also called diamine oxidase.
Yes.
And before that, it used to be called dexteramine oxidase. Most people don't know
No, I didn't know that.
that. So we have a lot of amino acids, like what are there, 26 or what's 20 some, 24 maybe, whatever it is. And they unfold to the left.
Hmm.
Why do they unfold to the left? God knows, and hopefully God does know why they unfold
I
to the
would hope
left.
so.
Yeah, but it's really important for the amino acids to unfold. This is my left. It looks like I'm going to my right, but it's my left. But the thing is, what most people don't know is that when they use a microwave oven, ding ding ding,
Mm.
it causes the amino acids to unfold to the right,
Oh, really?
and then this dextramine oxidase comes to the rescue to try to correct that,
Ah,
right? But what does dextramine oxidase run on? Copper.
copper. I know
Yeah,
that.
yeah. It doesn't work without copper. So DAO doesn't work without copper. Histamine N-methyltransferase, which is inside the cell,
Mm-hmm.
which will also break down histamines, it runs on copper. And so people who are suddenly going full bore carnivore are eating a lot of muscle meat with a lot of heme, which has a lot of iron. And I think it's causing a reaction in the body, and it can't deal with the oxidative stress that's coming with that. And so it's triggering this histamine reaction. And the other name for histaminase is called ceruloplasmin. And it's the largest protein in the human body, 1,066 amino acids. It's a
Mm.
beast. And when it was originally discovered in 1948, it had 8 copper atoms inside it, and it can carry an additional 10 when it's structured. So it's basically as I'm continuing to do my research, it does about 24 different enzymatic functions, and it's also a transport for copper.
Mm-hmm.
And so doctors aren't taught that.
No.
It's not on the internet. The internet doesn't talk about, yeah, this is what you got to do in order to, beef up your ceruloplasmin. Nobody talks about that,
Mm-hmm.
except on the root cause protocol. And so people are in the dark about how the body deals with exhaust.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what ceruloplasmin is. It's the master antioxidant enzyme. And it can express 24 different ways. And so for the listeners, it's like this protein can be a skateboard, it can be a tricycle, it could be a bike, it could be a motorcycle. You want a car? You want a plane? Do you want a sailboat? Do you want a motorboat? It can do all of that and then more. And it's very disorienting to hear that, because we've been raised in the era of big pharma,
Mm-hmm.
and they're based in one gene, one protein, one function. That's the paradigm of big pharma. One gene, one protein, one function. And it's very disruptive to have a protein like ceruloplasmin that can be a transformer and go 24 different directions. And the real kicker of this whole thing is, in order to make ceruloplasmin, and this goes back to the beginning of oxygen on the planet, but in order to make ceruloplasmin, you got to have retinoic acid to activate a key enzyme. There are 2 copper pumps inside the body, ATP7A and ATP7B. ATP7A is called the Menkes gene, and ATP7B is called the Wilson gene. So people might know about Menkes disease and Wilson's disease. And they're told that they're copper disorders, when in fact they're caused by iron overload. And if retinoic acid can't activate that enzyme, you can't load copper into ceruloplasmin, and then you can't break down the histamines. And what's important to know is that the guys who discovered ceruloplasmin, their name Holmberg and Laurel, they were 2 Swedish physiologists, brilliant scientists, and in their inaugural article about ceruloplasmin, they noted that there's a 400% rise in histaminase activity in a body that has optimal ceruloplasmin.
Wow.
So it's a big deal. Now here's something that a lot of people may not know about. Hold on just a second. So you may recall, when were you born?
79.
Okay, so just a couple years before you were born. I'm 1952, so I'm ancient, you know. And but in the 70s, in the early 70s, there was a big push to get rid of cholesterol.
Yes.
And there's a famous cover of Time magazine that had 2 eggs and a piece of bacon that was a kind of a sad face. It's a classic. People can find it online. In any event, they were trying to get rid of pigs from our diet.
Wow.
And I've always wondered, gee, I wonder why they were doing that. Oh, it's to get rid of cholesterol. And then you think, wait a minute, cholesterol goes all the way back to the great oxygen event. Can't be bad,
No.
you know? And so in a healthy human body, there should be 30 units of cholesterol. Turns out that in a healthy pig, there's 160 units
Wow.
of cholesterol. And so then we got to come back and say, well, let's go back to the farm. What's the job of the pig on the farm?
To eat all the scraps.
Exactly. And what might there be lurking in the scraps? Histamines.
Ah.
And so this incredible creature that'll eat anything has this incredible level of ceruloplasmin, which means it has this incredible level of histaminase that says, bring it on. I don't care what you give me. I'll eat it.
Yeah.
And we've been trained to be afraid of pork,
Mm-hmm.
the other white meat. Oh, it's got nitrites and nitrates. And it's like, wait a minute, we need those. Turns out that our body has enzymes, ceruloplasmin does it, and the complex 4 of our mitochondria are able to turn nitrates and nitrates into nitric oxide. Wow, I didn't know that. And so it just goes on and on and on. And so the phrase that I came up with to try to encapsulate this is, we've been misled and we've been misfed.
Yes.
And so the people who are relying on the internet as their source of information need to step back and rethink this, because it's the vast majority of the information on the interwebs, as we call them, is very suspect.
Very.
And I've labored mightily to try to make information that is tied very securely back to impeccable research. And I think anyone who's followed my work knows that I'm pretty meticulous about that. So the information is out there, and I couldn't have found all this knowledge that I've got if I didn't have access to the internet.
Mm-hmm.
And so I've got to be really careful about criticizing the internet, but we've got to be really discerning with Google searches.
Yes.
Because there's a lot of confusion out there, and there's a lot of opinion, right?
Yeah.
Everyone has an opinion.
Yeah.
But what I've tried to do is to present a compendium of knowledge so that people can make their own decisions. And that's, when I started this work over 10 years ago, I wanted to be the thinking person's nutritionist. And I wanted to present information, hopefully in an entertaining way, but present it so that people could say, wait a minute, I didn't know that. And so in the last year, a very dear friend of ours, who's a pastor, he has a phrase that he uses in a course on logic that he teaches to his parishioners. And the phrase is, missing information equals missing truth.
Mm.
And it's so true, because we know what we know, but we don't know what we don't know.
Right.
And so many people have these, dogmatic opinions about this and that, but they don't have full disclosure about how the human body works,
right,
how the human body struggles with oxygen. Every day we're breathing in oxygen, and we don't even think about it.
Right.
Well, next to fluoride, it's the most reactive element on the planet. And it's like, we don't even think about that. As soon as it goes into our lungs, There's this whole network of reactions to try to tame it down so it doesn't become a toxin to the body. And we don't think about that. We haven't been taught to think about that.
Yeah.
And this is a plea to your listeners. I'm sure there's some real smarty pants out there that maybe they can help me with this. You can't make energy in the mitochondria without oxygen.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely essential. I have asked world-renowned experts, how does oxygen get from the blood to the mitochondria? And do you know what the answer is? Crickets. They don't know.
Really?
Do you believe that?
No.
No, it's like, wait a minute. We're talking about the second most reactive element on the planet, that if it even looks askew, boom, there's going to be an explosion. And we're supposed to believe that it just gets from the blood to the mitochondria, and trust me on that. Like, wait a minute. So that's question number one that drives me bonkers. Question number two. Who's in charge of the 40 quadrillion mitochondria? Who's in charge of the heart cell, the cardiomyocyte, that has 10,000 mitochondria? Who's coordinating that activity in just that one cell? Who's coordinating the 600,000 mitochondria in an egg cell? Who's coordinating the 2 million in the substantia nigra neuron? Those are the kind of questions that keep me up at night. And by the grace of God, I don't lose sleep over it. But it's like, these are, a very dear friend of mine who's he's a world-renowned scientist. He said, Morley, you have mastered the art of the simple question. And I'm just trying to find out, gosh, how does this oxygen thing get to the mitochondria? I think it's a really important question. There's got to be a transport mechanism.
Yeah.
And so then I have an idea who's running it, but it's like people don't stop and think about that. And then and what we'll do is I'll introduce something now, and we can pick it up in a subsequent conversation. I was asking Sarah about whether she had smoke alarms in her home, which she proudly said, no, I took them all out. So that means you must cook a lot. That's great. But the smoke alarms were causing a lot of noise in the home. It's nothing worse than a funky smoke alarm going chirp, 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 or wah, wah, wah.
Especially if you have a kid with sensory issues.
Exactly. So it makes perfect sense what you did. But what people may or may not know is that there's a smoke alarm in our cells. And it's a gene called hypoxia inducible factor 1. And pardon the expression, it's a badass. It can influence the expression of 2,500 genes. We've got like 24,000 genes. So 10% of the genes are like, okay, yes, sir, I can do that. And it's a smoke detector. So where's the smoke? Well, if we're not making energy, we're making exhaust. And that smoke comes by way of oxidative stress. Some people like to call it inflammation, not knowing that inflammation is stage 2 of oxidative stress. So we've got oxidative stress, and inflammation is here, and this is called cancer up here. It's just this progressive buildup of oxidative stress. And so this is what everyone's all Twitter about dealing with the Chinese import, right? And they're worried about what they need to do to strengthen their immune system. So they've been told, take a lot of vitamin D.
Yes.
Right?
Yes. It's everywhere. I mean, everyone's saying it.
Even Dr. Fauci, right? Dr. Fauci. Right. So I found an article just over the weekend that it left me speechless. So it turns out that the active form of D, the 125 dihydroxyvitamin D3, puts hypoxia-inducible factor 1 to sleep. It downregulates it. Now, that's alarming. But the reason why it's particularly alarming is that one of the genes, just one of those 2,500 genes, but maybe the most important gene, is a little gene called CP, which stands for Ceruloplasmin. And so taking vitamin D is shutting down our mechanism to make bioavailable copper. I have a problem with that.
Mm.
And so I think people need to understand that there's way more to this story. Maybe we could do a whole session just on vitamin D metabolism, because I think people have been grossly misled about that metabolite and that nutrient. But that's just plain wicked, that it shuts down the smoke alarm. And we're talking about an ancient gene that goes back to antiquity, way, 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 way back. And so this synthetic hormone is completely disrupting our body, and people don't know that, especially the doctors who are recommending it.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I hear functional medicine doctors recommending it all the time as well. So it's not just your conventional medicine. I think it's
No,
to
that's
the
right.
alternative medicine
Absolutely.
space as well. Is like, you've got to start taking this because it's going to help you with your immune system. That's what we're being told.
Well, here's the kicker. Um, it's only the active form of vitamin D that is the one that's doing all these amazing things, influencing genes, right? Well, active D has to be partnered with something called RXR, retinoid X receptor. And when they're working together, then they influence the vitamin D expression. There's a transcription process that's influenced by those two working together, and then the VDRE goes to town. Guess where RXR comes from? Comes from retinol. That's nowhere found in the standard diet.
Wow.
Because most people are eating a low-fat diet. They're afraid of fat.
Yeah.
And they don't, oh, cod liver oil, are you serious? Liver, are you serious? I can't do that.
Yeah.
And so if you don't, you can take a bucket full of vitamin D, and if you don't have RXR, nothing happens.
Oh, wow.
Nothing.
Wow. Yeah, it's amazing how afraid people are of these foods. I mean, they're just absolutely terrified of liver. And, I always like to go down the rabbit hole on different things. And I've been down, just from my own experience of my own kind of hormonal journey. Women not having their cycles, women not being fertile. And I was watching this fertility doctor over the weekend, and he said, the number one food, if I could tell women who are interested in getting pregnant or improving their fertility, the number one food they should all be eating is grass-fed beef liver from a good source. That's the number one food. He's like, the patients that have the worst time with fertility are my vegan and vegetarians.
Absolutely.
And they will refuse to eat the organ meats, but that is the first thing that you can start eating to improve your fertility right away.
Absolutely true. And I think I'd love to find out the name of that practitioner, because he's spot on.
Yeah.
And people don't know that, and they don't understand. Again, Price talks about it in his book, that there was a ritual that newly married couples went through to eat organ-rich meals and very nutrient-dense meals, so they could preserve the genetic integrity of that community.
Wow.
It's very, very important, and we've lost all that. Oh, well, I'll just go to Chick-fil-A and get whatever they've got.
Yeah.
It's like, huh? Wait a minute.
Yeah.
And so if people don't understand the changes that have taken place in the farming system.
Yes, that's huge.
If people don't understand the changes that have taken place in food processing, and if they don't understand the changes that have taken place in pharmaceuticals, most pharmaceuticals now are activated with fluoride. And how do you know? Because the name will have the letter F as in Frank in it. And as soon as you see F, I'll let you fill in the blank what it's going to do to you. And so it's like, it's really bad. And so farming, food, pharmaceuticals, and the synergy between the three is, it's overwhelming, because people don't have the mineral mass to activate the enzymes to make energy or make the metabolic pathways work. And they don't know that.
No, they don't. And we're so brainwashed to believe that if we eat our, 10 cups of vegetables per day, that we're somehow going to replenish these minerals. But how are we going to replenish minerals when our soil is so depleted? And if you just go to the grocery store and buy your greens, I mean, I just don't see that. It never worked for me. All it did was just ruin my digestion and make me feel sicker and sicker.
Right. I think people need to be getting their food from farmers markets.
Yeah.
Ideally. And then a step down from that would be a good supermarket that you just shop the perimeter of the store. You don't go in the center. If
No.
food is coming in a box, a can, frozen food, or your car window, it's not really food.
No.
You don't know what it is. It's, what is it? Pollock, what's his first name? Michael Pollock calls it food-like substances, but it's not food.
No.
And so, again, at the end of the day, people are kind of tired and they're just like, oh man, I'm hungry and I want to eat something. Well, you're going to need to make it yourself. And you don't want to zap it with a microwave.
No.
It's a very bad thing. And I wonder whether part of this dynamic with the uptake of the carnivore diet is people are maybe reheating stuff in microwaves, and that might be messing things up too. I've never thought about that.
Interesting. Yeah, people eating leftover meats, microwaving them. I do see that happening.
Yeah.
It's hard to say, and I don't think that we are getting the minerals that we need. I've heard,
No, I can assure you we're not.
Yeah.
That's a slam dunk.
Yeah. So someone, I know we've got to wrap up pretty soon for this conversation, but someone with histamine issues, you think that is a lot of the time major copper deficiency, and being in these fat metabolism, it exposes that even more than it would if we were in this chronic, glucose metabolism. And do you think that's accurate?
Yeah, no, I do. And what I encourage people to do, there's two different systems that they can use to clear these sensitivities. One is a applied kinesiology or muscle test that NAET, N is the Indian. Yep. Okay. And very effective. It doesn't work 100% of the time, but it works about probably 95% of the time. And it's incredibly powerful because what's this reaction? It's just an error message that needs to be cleared. And the other system is called Allergy TX, like Texas, allergytx.com. And that's a computer-based system, but there are not as many practitioners who do that.
Never heard of it.
Yeah, NAET is pretty prevalent around the country, but the Allergy TX is pretty hard to find.
Yeah.
This one? Oh, excuse me, just a second.
Go ahead.
Yeah. There you go. So that would be the first thing I would tell people to do. Okay. And usually within 24 to 48 hours of the treatment, they can go back to doing their thing. Okay. So that's really important to know that. And then the next step is to start to remineralize their body. And people need to go and track down the root cause protocol, rcp123.org. It's a very, effective technique. Stole it from Mother Nature. There's a series of stops and starts. One of the first stops is stop taking vitamin D, stop taking iron, stop taking ascorbic acid, and we'll have a chance, I'm sure, to talk about the nuts and bolts of it. But the important thing is for people who are having a histamine reaction is it's a warning sign that their copper metabolism isn't ideal. They can clear the problem short term, and then they can address it long term with a change in mineralization. And it's very, very, very effective.
Awesome. Well, I'll make sure I link your root cause protocol below in the website, how they can get in touch and actually do that protocol. And we'll be definitely looking out for questions underneath this video so we can talk more. And I have more questions.
That's great.
We just do a whole video on, and I didn't even touch on magnesium, which is the big one that people have questions about. But this histamine issue keeps popping up over and over again. So I feel like this was enough to kind of get a conversation started and get that moving. So I appreciate all your time today.
Absolutely. And real quick before we break company here, just to let people know, I cut my teeth on magnesium, as you know, and I was obsessed with it for years and years. I came into it thinking, well, all you got to do is take more magnesium and everything will be solved.
Right.
No, it's not that simple. And so it took me a long time to realize that the reason why people keep losing their magnesium is that the biggest and oldest fight on this planet is between copper and iron over oxygen. And if there's not enough bioavailable copper, iron gets the upper hand. And it turns that oxygen into oxidative stress. And what causes magnesium loss? A rise of oxidative stress. And so it's axiomatic. And so if you've got the classic signs of magnesium loss, then you've got to go upstream and realize I've got a rising level of oxidative stress, which means my copper and iron aren't playing well together.
Fascinating.
Yeah, it is. It's really fun when you
Yeah.
begin to piece it together. It's so elegantly simple. It really is. And I know people think, oh, it can't be that simple. It really is.
Yeah.
And it's beautiful how the body is designed. There are a lot of moving parts, but at the end of the day, you got to make energy, and you got to be able to clear the exhaust.
Yes.
That's it.
Yeah.
You know, it's like Karate Kid.
Yes.
Wax on, wax off. It's like, no, it's got to be more than that. It's like, but Mr. Maragi knew, right?
Yes.
Wax on, wax off. That's it.
Exactly. I love it. I love it. Well, thanks again for this conversation, and I'm excited about the next one for sure. So you guys definitely stay tuned, and we'll be talking again very soon.
And thanks for the opportunity. I enjoy these opportunities, and I'm sure we're going to take some very interesting twists and turns in the coming conversations.
Definitely.
Okay.
All right.